The International Maritime Organization's MEPC 82 meeting starts next week as the UN body moves forward with setting key emission and decarbonisation targets for global shipping. Welcome to the Seatrade Maritime Podcast. Today you will be hearing from Arsenio Dominguez, Secretary General of the IMO, who Seatrade Maritime News correspondent Nick Savvides caught up with during SMM in Hamburg. Nick zeroes in on whether, as a fossil fuel, LNG has a role in shipping's energy transition, and also takes a look at the theme for World Maritime Day in 2025. He kicked off the interview by asking the Secretary General about whether the IMO's policies on the use of LNG were more stringent than those of the EU.
The way that I can mention how we're addressing LNG is that it continues to be a fuel for the transition. And that needs to be recognized. At the same time, that it's part of the life cycle assessment of the fuels that we are evaluating within the International Maritime Organization. It's also important to acknowledge that there's a lot of technological development that is expected and is coming on. And if we look at the methane slip, which is one of the main concerns from LNG engines, in comparison with the ones that are 10-year-olds to the ones that are being installed right now, there's a big difference and a big improvement. And that's one of the areas that is important to retain and to remember. So at the organization, of course, we have made a decision to go for the decarbonisation by around 2050. We are looking into all the possible fuels. LNG is one of those. It is part of the life cycle assessments, as I mentioned. And of course, time will tell in how it will continue to progress, what type of LNG will end up being the one that can continue to be used. But again, it's important to recognize that this is a transitional fuel and improvements will continue to come on. But the review will be a permanent one in order to meet the regulations and the standards that we are developing at IMO, and of course they are from well to wake.
Indeed, and on that basis, at some point, even though we have more efficient engines, and I think we're talking about high pressure two-stroke engines as opposed to the four-stroke low pressure engines, there still is an element of well to wake methane slip, or at least releasing into the atmosphere, and capturing that carbon isn't possible, or that carbon equivalent. And once it gets into the atmosphere, it's 80 times more potent. So is there really a role for such a fossil fuel? I mean, a lot of industry specialists are saying we're going to end up with some very stranded assets from LNG. Are you concerned about that? Is that a waste of money? Is that a waste of effort?
I wouldn't call it a waste of money or a waste of effort. We have acknowledged that there are aspects and issues that we need to address when it comes to LNG. But again, 10 years ago, the conversations were completely different. And in that time, we are gathering additional data, additional information. And this is what I continue to go back to the fact that as technology continues to develop, as there's more investment, as there's more effort into the production of the fuels of the future, it's difficult at this stage to actually completely root out LNG, which may become not just a transitional fuel, but later on, there may be an opportunity, depending on the production of LNG, or how it actually is utilized to produce other type of fuels that will continue to have a role to play within the transition towards decarbonisation. But of course, there's further work to do. Some of those entities are there, and we are aware of that. But that's why we have a group of experts that continue to evaluate this on a regular basis. It's something that we'll continue to look at, and that we'll continue to use the experience, the expertise of those that can then provide answers and solutions for us.
Okay. And on occasions, when I've spoken to industry experts, they complain that the slow regulatory build-up and the fact that there isn't the financial constraints or the ability to charge for carbon is actually allowing for the development of LNG and similar fuels that are not really, I mean, you call it a transitional fuel, others call it a high carbon fuel and therefore should be outlawed straight away. But there's not this kind of move directly from the regulator to a decisive move to give the industry the lead about which direction to take. What would you say to those people?
Every time that we're requested to provide guidance, we do so. It happened with the initial strategy back in 2018. Mm-hmm. We provided further guidance last year and clarity in relation to the different steps for decarbonisation in the end goal when we adopted the strategy in 2023. Concerns will continue to come up. I always focus into what is the next steps that we can take rather than constantly bringing back what if, because there are actions that we need to be taken as well as we move forward. And it is important to recognize that is not being slow. Is the fact that we need to address concerns of not just a group of owners, a group of operators, a group of countries. We have to work for the whole industry. We have to work for all the member states, 176. We have to work for the ship owners that have more of a challenge to be part of this transition, because they probably just have between 5 and 10 ships operating, which is the large majority of the ship owners around the world. So when we actually take steps forward is after further consideration, after the analysis, after the reviews, that would give us a confidence that we are on the right track and that we can also address the concerns. There's a phrase in the UN that I don't like to use loosely, which is leave no one behind. If we are called, if we are named to be slow because we are actually taking due care and due consideration for everybody that has to be part of this transition, there's probably a different way of calling the responsibility that we have as a UN agency, as the organizations that regulate the sector, to look after the benefit of all and not just a few. The reality is that at the same time, when I speak to engine manufacturers, for example, they continue to highlight how the improvements will come up and how dual fuels that can change in the future from LNG to any other, a methanol or ammonia fuel or biofuels, you name it. The options are there, can happen. So when ship owners, the ship operators and the stakeholders start making their projections, of course they have all this information taken into account. We will continue to provide more and more guidance and more solutions, and that's why we had a timeline to finalize the additional basket of measures we comprises with technical and economic measures by next year and enter into force in 2027. And I'm sure that it will continue to be some of the questions, some further guidance. But we are providing it, and we're always going to listen to all those concerns. But at the same time, I have to call for all those that can take the first steps, that can be early movers, either countries or ship operators, ship owners, to actually do so, because we need that experience, that expertise, in order to achieve the goals that we are all setting for ourselves.
Next year, you've set your theme for the World Maritime Days, looking after the oceans, essentially. It's a bit outside of your remit, is it not?
We operate in the oceans, we regulate the ships, but we are also very much aware of the impact that shipping has into the ocean. So the array of environmental regulations that we have are part of that role. We also want to support the ratification and future implementation of the BBNJ agreement, the one that is going to look on biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. And there's a role for IMO to play there, because we know how to manage and establish special areas, in particularly sensitive sea areas, that is very similar to the maritime protection areas. So we have a part and a duty to actually share our experience and expertise. There is also, as a member of the United Nations, that next year we have the 3rd UN Oceans Conference, again to look into the healthy aspects of the ocean that are needed for us to thrive as a society and as a human race. So it demonstrates that we are very much in line with continue to support the shipping industry, but also recognize that we can support other UN agencies, other sectors, and other goals of societies that we utilize and that we have a responsibility and a duty. If you look at the Marpol Convention, as well as the London Convention and the London Protocol, there are several regulations there that actually tackle oil spills and dumping of illegal substances or rubbish and plastics into the ocean. That's part of our responsibility as a global organization. There's a UN treaty on plastic that is being developed, and we already have regulation for plastic. What better way of advertising and sharing all that knowledge and experience than actually dedicating the World Maritime theme of 2025 to the UN Oceans Conference and to the oceans themselves?
On that theme, one of the other issues around shipping and the oceans, keeping them clean, is the coatings that they use on ships. And some academics have complained that the soft coatings, they use a catalyst, which is DBT, dibutyl tin, which is very poisonous, and they're saying that this is leaching into the oceans. Is that something that you might look at as part of your World Maritime Day support?
Our regulatory process is very changeable and interactive. We always learn from experience and for further developments. We have a convention that's been very effective, the Anti-Fouling Convention. It was recently amended after more than 15 years of being implemented. We're always open for any additional information that can demonstrate that something wrong has happened, that there is a need to review a regulation, and that there's a solution that comes for it. We never close the doors for that. That's why the organization is there. So we will be happy to look into that and any other topic that is required for us to pay close attention and to find solutions if it's demonstrated that is needed.
And does the IMO also take into account the health of the ocean in terms of bottom trawling?
The bottom of the ocean, is the International Seabed Authority that actually have responsibility on it, and we don't regulate the operations of the fishing fleet. Our role is the aspects related to the safety of the vessels as well as the training of the personnel on board the vessels. But we are taking responsibilities as well in the fact that as part of the future amendments or developing of amendments to the MARPOL Convention, which is the one that deals with marine pollution, is what happens to fishing gears,
right,
and the negative effect that they have. So we're already working on the guidelines that have been put in place because they are considered as garbage within the MARPOL Convention, which means that they can't just be disposed at sea, and there's a process for that to be recorded, and of course it's only if it's related to safety aspects that may be allowed, and at the same time it's looking for a set of regulations in the future in order to deal with the marking of fishing vessels that would allow us to move more into containing and having the necessary data and information into what is happening to the fishing gears. Of course, there's also the part from the government in order to stimulate in that relationship that they built with the fishing sector, in order to get that relationship into the fishing gears not just being disposed, but get a benefit for actually bringing them back, and a little bit more as well of the campaign in sensitizing into the damage the fishing gears actually make to the ocean. So all that is part of the responsibilities that we take within the remit of the organization, and sometimes as well as passing the baton to others that are more responsible to do so. But for us, highlighting that we care about the oceans, we hope that it also brings others on board, say that we all have a duty to play in order to protect and get the oceans to be more sustainable and respect them as well. I think we need to recognize and respect the oceans.
Secretary General, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the Seatrade Maritime Podcast, and we look forward to joining you on the next episode.